This July, we're taking life seriously. Cardiac arrest is scary and more common than you might think. Did you know that every year nearly 9 million people will experience a cardiac event outside of hospital? Would you know what to do? I'm Australian actor Steve Bastoni, and I'm urging everyone to learn CPR as part of our Don't Die July campaign. Visit don'tdiejuly.com and sign up today, because you can't put a price on life.
From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. And here on the Muckrakers, we continue to tackle the most pressing and controversial news issues of our time, shining more light and less heat on the subjects that really matter to you. Well, today we're going to have a deep dive into the NATO summit and Sir Keir Starmer's extraordinary visit to the White House. What did you make of that? Well, they say when sorrows come, they come not single spies, but in battalions. And rather like buses, you wait all day for one and then three come along at once. Well, it's the same here on the Muckrakers, because we have not one, not two, but three of TNT's titans. I'm delighted to be joined by Taylor, James and Basil. Welcome to all three of you.
Hello. Great to be with you, Andrew.
Fantastic. Thank you. Basil, it's your hat trick here on the thing, but you're on all week, which is what we love. Now, I want to look at this NATO summit. I looked at all the videos, all the speeches coming out of there, and NATO General Jens Stoltenberg and US President Joe Biden both gave speeches. Stoltenberg gave speeches. First of all, let me, I don't know if you managed to see those speeches. What are your thoughts on that? Let me start with you, Taylor. What are your thoughts on Stoltenberg's speech?
Yes, I did get a chance to watch the speeches. I was paying close attention to Joe Biden in particular, because I did state on the previous program on Tuesday that I felt that this was perhaps a test run for the future of Biden's run for a second term in office as president. And we could get into what his performance was like in a second here. But as far as Stoltenberg's performance, I mean, I thought it was a pretty typical speech. He included all of the right buzzwords, stating that this was a summit that was centered around negotiations, peace, unity. So he used all the right terms that you're supposed to use. But I think it's interesting if you do look into his background, just to perhaps provide the viewers with some context as to who he is. He actually, I was very surprised to see, he actually had a background in journalism for some time. He also was the UN Special Envoy on climate change. He also is quite closely associated with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation through his ties to the Gavi Vaccine Alliance. He, in fact, was a board member on the Vaccine Fund, which is the financing arm of the Gavi Vaccine Alliance, which, by the way, was funding or is a funder of the ID 2020 initiative, which is a global effort to get the world's population on a centralized digital ID system. So that's just a brief background on who he is. He has some very interesting ties to various individuals that we speak about on TNT. But again, he ticks all the boxes for being sort of the perfect globalist prototype. But I thought the speech was quite generic and pretty much what I expected. Of course, it was full of a lot of exaggeration, misconceptions, outright deception, and lies, to be honest, same as Joe Biden's, but it was a pretty typical speech that you would expect at a summit like this.
Well, he claimed that the conflict between Moscow and Kyiv would shape the global security systems for decades to come. He actually said the biggest cost and greatest risk will be if Russia wins in Ukraine. We cannot let that happen. James?
Yeah, I did watch the speech. I mean, look, he said peace has been preserved. I'd ask who peace has been preserved for, clearly within NATO member countries. But, you know, since 1949, since that Washington Treaty was signed, the US has either invaded or bombed 28 countries, and that's the official list. Of course, there's probably lots of other countries that it's done without actually announcing it. So a lot of hypocrisy on show, I think. The other thing that he said is it's time to stand for freedom and democracy now around Ukraine, which is quite, again, more hypocrisy, really, because if you think about Stoltenberg, he actually came and took office in 2014, which was the year that, of course, the US meddled in democracy in Ukraine. So I think for me, there's a lot of hypocrisy on display from Stoltenberg and Joe Biden, I think, at this conference.
Basil?
Yeah, Stoltenberg did say that Russia poses no immediate threat, which I was pleased to see for all the ramping up of rhetoric, and also that he hopes Ukraine will join NATO within the next 10 years, which is rather different from what Keir Starmer was saying about Ukraine being on an irreversible path to joining NATO. It really is arguably the biggest bugbear of the lot when it comes to the negotiations with Russia. John Kirby, the National Security Advisor, said on MSNBC yesterday that the war will have to end with negotiations and pointed to Kiev's peace plan. But nobody seems to be talking about negotiations in Washington this week. It's all about increasing military spending. As Taylor said, the rhetoric is all very bellicose. And of course, at the top of the ticket, as it were, you've got a completely incoherent, senile moron who is under very close scrutiny from his own party and his own media as to whether he's forced to resign this week or next week. So it's a somewhat farcical situation. And as Pelly Neros-Taylor pointed out earlier this morning on Locked and Loaded with Rick Munn, China supplies the vast majority of the components required for the American weaponry that they're pointing back at China and Russia. So there's an extent to which this whole thing is a sort of choreographed farce, frankly, Andrew.
Yeah, choreographed farce is right. I mean, according to what he's saying is that a Russian victory would embolden his other opponents. You mentioned China, but he also mentioned about Iran, North Korea, who support Moscow and want NATO to fail, is what he said. What's your take on that, Taylor?
Yeah, I think this is to continue to instill fear and panic in the public because people are far more easy to control if they are fearful of something. I mean, we saw that with COVID-19. It worked quite well. People were scared 24/7. The media was covering this deadly virus. And so people were compelled to make decisions that they otherwise would not. Right now, NATO is in a position, especially in the United States, where they need to get everybody on board morally and mentally to support a continued war effort in this region in the world that is in Ukraine and Russia and elsewhere too. But specifically, they've been focusing on Ukraine in particular. So they have to really instill fear in people and then also wrap up some of the loose ends and some of the problem areas that they have when it comes to gaining public trust. So I do want to point out a few key moments within the past month, in June in particular, where you saw, and I think it's very interesting, but just stick with me on this,